Good afternoon and welcome. It is on behalf of Annika Schlitte, Natalia Goro, Hans-Martin Zademach, Christian Steiner, Michael Zimmermann, Richard Nate, Joost van Loon, and Robert Schmidt that I would like to welcome you to our official kickoff event for DFG Research Training Group 2589, Practicing Place, Sociocultural Practices, and Epistemic Configurations. First and foremost, I would like to welcome tonight's distinguished guest and keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Ayse Caglar, University of Vienna, and the Institute for Human Sciences. And another special welcome goes to our Vice President for Research, Professor Dr. Jens Hogreve. In many ways, perhaps most of all, I would like to welcome our fellows. After all, this is what a research training group is all about. So we're happy that Sabine Aretz, Jessica Balling, Fabian Ebeling, Gustavo Gutierrez, David Kempf, Johanna Lederer, Shruti Malik, Michelle Sturm-Müller, Nina Welters, Moritz Fischer-Zielke, our doctoral fellows, are here. By the very same token, we are so pleased that postdoc fellow Sarah Earnshaw and our academic coordinator Nele Putz have joined the team and are working with us. Our fellows here in Eichstätt are from places literally all over the world: India, Colombia, Scotland, from other German universities, and from Eichstätt as well. We are also proud to have 14 associated fellows, both on a doctoral as well as on a postdoctoral level. And they too come from places all over the world, from other universities in Germany and from Eichstätt too. And this should give you an idea. These are just some snapshots of us during our many discussion sessions, all of which until today have been on Zoom only. This alone makes today a special day. We would have loved to invite our many cooperating partners. Most of them have tuned in, some are here. So let me seize the opportunity to let me tell you that you are the best possible cooperating partners that we could ever have dreamed of having. So many of you, be it Edward Casey at Stony Brook, or Jeff Malpass in Tasmania, Miles Orwell in Philadelphia, or David Nye in Denmark, Yogita Goyal at UCLA, or Saskia Sassen at Columbia, Rob Shields in Alberta, or Ted Chatsky in Kentucky, Tim Creswell in Edinburgh, and Martina Löw and Stefan Günzel in Berlin, Thomas Fischer here, to name just a few, continually took an active and dedicated interest in our progress over many years. You contributed invaluable ideas, and it was comforting to see how you, in all places all over the world, not only shared our excitement, but what is more, you often sparked it. It is with great pride that I can say that all of you have committed yourselves to coming to visit for longer visits as well. Most of you have already been here many times, either as a member of our predecessor, Philosophy of Place, or on an individual basis. And last but not least, we'd like to welcome everyone on YouTube. This is a live stream event and will also be available as a video later on our webpage with the very simple address practicing.place. We wanted to make sure that everyone who couldn't be here has a chance of joining us still. After all, there is a limit to the number of people allowed to convene in person, and we want to be careful too. And I can only apologize wholeheartedly for our reduced guest list. Believe me, we would have loved to invite more people. So finally, it is with great joy that I simply say, dear guests, surely tonight's not the night for a thesis statement and an interdisciplinary rumination on what practicing place entails. This is reserved for numerous other occasions to come, and we have a keynote to follow. But let me simply dwell on a few very basic ideas that make up the bone and marrow of what we as a group are planning to do. Our job is to reflect critically on the concepts of place and placing from a decidedly interdisciplinary perspective. Place and processes of placing or replacing have become central to a discussion of complex global interrelations, precisely at a time of growing international interdependencies and seemingly borderless communication networks. According to our guiding research idea, we suggest to think of place dynamically as practicing place. Hence, we will consider specific practices of placing and their concomitant epistemic configurations, such as comprehending, mapping, locating, imagining, writing, experiencing, and redefining places. We will also look at the situatedness and specific locality of any practice. Every practice is shaped by given places, while it at the same time also designs and produces new places in a performative, ongoing process. Seen this way, places can never be conceived of as singular static entities in the sense of Heimat or a closed life world. Rather, places have to be thought of in terms of a dynamic, multifaceted, dialogical, controversial, effective, and especially participatory system of relations that is informed by aspects of performance, construction, perception, production, experience, recognition, inscription. In addition, every practice is tied to other super or subordinate as well as contiguous strategies of placing. Thus, for instance, appropriation or disappropriation, inclusion and exclusion, but also participation are intricate to processes of placing that both inform and continually produced in social and economic, imagined and fictional, artistic and medial practices. Our particular group from sociology, geography, philosophy, as well as literary and cultural studies, art history, guarantees the proposed training program's interdisciplinary orientation, exploring the innovative cross-fertilization between social science approaches and the humanities. Clearly, what we are not is some covert, culturally conservative re-instigation of monolithic and, in my view, dangerously misleading ideas of Heimat. I remember the slogan of an exhibition that my colleague Robert Schmidt and I walked past by chance alone when we discussed the project during many walking tours. And it said, de-Heimatize. And this may be an ideal addition to the practices of placemaking that we analyze and undertake, de-Heimatize. If there is an occasion to say a few thank yous, this is the one. So please bear with me. First, all our thanks go to university management, particularly to President Gabriele Gien, who would have loved to be here but meets with all other university presidents elsewhere, Vice President Jens Hogreve, who is here and will celebrate with us, Chancellor Thomas Kleinert, all of you bore with us during the often breathtaking, at times tedious, and certainly multiple stage long process of application. Thanks also to the whole team of the Center for Research Support, ZFF, to Magdalena Schönweitz for helping us in the long process of drafting the final, especially the final application, to Daniel Romic for being instrumental in getting the predecessor college underway and helping us to this day, and of course to Wolfgang Thiel. Thanks to the Personal Resource Department, Karin Kundinger, Julia Wiedmann, Andreas Sandner, they fought with Brexit and all kinds of obstacles. Thanks to DFG representative Michael Becht, thanks to graphic specialist Katrin Witschig, to the finance department for always looking for ways to make things work. And especially thanks to the facility management for Alexander Wirth, who did his best to find us wonderful quarters, which reminds me, come visit us. Marktplatz 2, center of Eichstätt, offices with a view of the cathedral, of the Baroque Market Square, and so on. And thanks to the whole team, also Albert Faller, for making the electricity and all the streaming possible. It wasn't so easy. But thanks also to so many colleagues and friends, both here at KU and elsewhere, who continually provided support and encouragement, often good ideas, and helped us along. I fear I can't name them all, but suffice it here for me to single out one of many, hoping that everyone else who helped will feel included. My thanks go to Dr. Silke Bechler, manager of the Faculty of Languages and Literatures, who has many years of expertise in both the DFG Research Group and Research Training Group management. And it's Silke's office that I walk by every morning. So I say this with a sense of foreboding, a apology and gratitude, since she seriously had to endure many more questions than most people can muster. Especially for tonight, let me say thank you to Eva Maria Spitzer, Hannah Marquardt, and Simon Zegelmann, our student assistants, to Bruno Grimm for handling the camera so well, and perhaps most of all to Nele Putz, our coordinator, who thought of literally everything and fought many battles, both with the virus and the weather. Geez, seriously, I hope I haven't forgotten anyone, and if so, my advance apologies. On a different note, I hope all of you here, and by extension all of you out there in the ether, share my excitement of this first analog in-person meeting. As you know, we started our research training group on April 1st, 2021, and we would have long had our official kickoff meeting hadn't it been for it that must not be named. So this meeting tonight is in the happy spirit of, say, exuberant and joyous defiance. Tonight, it's our time to enjoy our achievement. After all, this is the very first DFG-funded research training group at KU, and everyone knows just how competitive this particular format is. And we will celebrate. Of course, all in line with safety precaution measures, which is also why we need to have our reception and barbecue and drinks in the park nearby. And what is the best way to celebrate? Quite right. You invite yourselves illustrious guests. We have done that very thing, and as you know, our guest tonight is Ayse Caglar. Let me only say how thrilled I was and still am when she accepted our invitation. But I'll leave the introduction of our guest in much more capable hands in a few minutes. For now, let me turn to the highlights of tonight's program. And for our first highlight, it is my pleasure to hand over the mic, no mic drop, that might easily go awry, to Jens Hogreve, Vice President for Research at the Catholic University of Eichstätt-Ingolstadt. And what remains for me to do is to wish you all an enjoyable evening. Thank you, and once again, welcome.
Thank you. Well, I'm not so sure about the highlight, but at least I do my very best to be as brief as possible. So first of all, welcome to all of you, and especially the research fellows of the DFG training group. It's a pleasure having you here. Another welcome to our guest, Professor Caglar, and of course Professor Schmidt as the leader or speaker of this very great initiative, and all the others that are here today. As Professor Schmidt already said, the president very unfortunately cannot be with us here today because she is meeting all the other presidents of the Bavarian universities discussing the next winter term, and I hope the outcomes will be best for what we can do in terms of teaching and meeting again at this great university in the winter term. So keeping our fingers crossed here. There we are finally able to meet in person. I'm very happy that we can at least see each other from the distance and later in the garden, and can celebrate the first DFG training group here at KU, and that fills me with great joy. And to be honest, I'm for 5 years now in that specific role at Vice President for Research and Young Scientists, that's the very important addition, and this is one of the meetings or gatherings I was looking forward to most, meeting this great group and this very interesting, working on this very interesting topic. This joy, or this filling with joy, is not only because this is the first training group of its kind at KU, but it's mostly because of you, the talented young scientists we could invite from all over the world. You as motivated researchers for whom KU will be a home for the next couple of years. The research group prepared an amazing program supporting you on your academic journey, as well boosting your career, your future academic career. And I promise you will not be disappointed. You have chosen an excellent supervisory and mentoring team and, of course, the best place to start a research career or continue a research career as a research place we have here at KU. My thank, of course, goes to the leadership team of the research training group. We have heard all the names a few minutes ago that took all the efforts preparing this DFG proposal and navigated all of us through the ups and some downs during the process, but finally won the award and won the prize, and that makes all of us proud. The German Research Foundation approved the training program as one of its kind, and that's actually what they said during the visits they made here. And this is actually another fact that makes us proud that this group could prepare a very innovative and interesting and insightful training program. I learned that there have been some little administrative hurdles during the past weeks and months you needed to navigate through, but I hope all of you have at least access to a laptop or computer by now. Your offices seem to be amazing. I'm looking forward to the invitation, visiting there and visiting them in person. I did not have the chance so far. The German Research Foundation, I just had another meeting with them on Tuesday, acknowledged our university to be a good place to do research. Practicing places or practicing place is your topic, and I hope that we will be a good home, a good place where you can unfold your ideas as well as your creativity, and may the beautiful campus we see outside be a place of inspiration for all of your projects and for the discussions you might have with all your fellow colleagues and students. Another inspiration will be, of course, the international body of the students and the faculty itself. You have come to us from so many countries, from India, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Great Britain, the US, France, and Spain. And it's a great honor for us to have you here, and that you enrich your university, our university, as research fellows, as professors, as fellows at the training group, and help us broaden our minds. Again, welcome to this university. Over the next years, our university, the KU, will actually reinvent the program to support young scientists and postdocs and doctoral students. And for this significant transformation, we need your help. So it would be of tremendous help if all of you could support us during this initiative by sharing your ideas and providing us feedback of our actual structures and our programs we run to support you as PhD students or postdocs. We want to learn from you what your actual needs are, and your needs to not only support your specific research, but also to support or develop your personality and your international network. That is why I invite you all today to join our Young Researchers Day on October 6th. And of course, and Professor Schmidt already mentioned that, and please visit or take a look or have a look at the various offers our Research Service Center, ZFF, has on their webpage and that the team is providing to you. So finally, we are proud that we are able to be with you on your way and seize all the opportunities KU will give you. Good luck for all your research projects. Good luck for making friends. And I'm looking very forward to meeting all of you outside during the barbecue, during the gathering. And take care during these times. And again, welcome at KU.
So it's our pleasure to introduce our guest for tonight. Ayse Caglar is a professor at the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology at the University of Vienna. Her research took her many places. She received her PhD at McGill University in Montreal, her habilitation at the Freie Universität Berlin, and she was a professor at the Department of Sociology and Social Anthropology at the Central European University in Budapest. She was also part of the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Religious and Ethnic Diversity in Göttingen as a Minerva Fellow, before joining the University of Vienna as a professor in 2011. Ayse Caglar has provided us with valuable and inspiring research in the fields of critical migration studies on displacement, dispossession, and urban restructuring, to name just a few. And to introduce our distinguished guest, we wanted to highlight how her research helps us to think of place dynamically, the guiding research idea of our graduate college. To start, in her book, co-authored with Nina Schlick-Giller, titled Migrants and City Making, Dispossession, Displacement, and Urban Regeneration, which was published by Duke University Press in 2018, Ayse Caglar offers us an insightful study that applies theories of place and space as sites of social production. She provides a language to talk about these productions, social relations, and the power dynamics that shape them, with an analytical focus on the structuring and placemaking processes of the marginalized, displaced, and dispossessed. Throughout, Ayse Caglar dismantles the dichotomy between migrants and non-migrants and outlines the oftentimes disregarded role of marginalized groups as social actors in the processes of city making. Ayse Caglar highlights narratives and processes of exclusion and explores the gray areas in these discussions.
She's further contributed valuable research for the conceptualizations of citizenship, thinking it as social processes which are connected to places and spaces. With the lens of our graduate in college, a journey through Ayse Caglar's research provides stimulating connections regarding places and practicing of places and their accompanying epistemic configurations. Further highlighting some of these takes us to our own projects. Ayse Caglar's ethnographic and methodological approach of going beyond nationalist and ethnic lens becomes very fruitful for my very own project, which looks at walking practices and narratives at guided walking tours in the cities of Delhi and Berlin. Guided walking tours can be seen as a practice of knowledge and cultural production and urban reproduction through walking within tourist places that often leads to iconization of cities through walking practices on specific focus on historical and political narratives and urban landscapes that often feeds our very own practices of city making. Within these trends, various walking tours have emerged in the past. Refugee voice tours in Berlin, for example, is one such tour where perspectives and narratives are shared by immigrants in Syria and retold stories of Berlin through their own perspective. This makes tours a very practice of retelling, redefining, appropriating narratives and places through the practices of walking. The narratives highlights geopolitical events that connect cities and therefore addresses city-citizenship relationship that goes beyond nation-state. Within this context, Ayse Caglar's concept of displacement and emplacement become very key ideas in investigating guided walking tours as practices of place-making, place-taking, and eventually practicing place. Also situated in the urban context, concepts of citizen practices and technology are addressed in Fabian's project, in which he analyzes the smart city dispositive. The emergence of smart city projects, in part, rests on pivotal moments in 2008 financial crisis. In the US, city budget and administrative staff were cut, and big tech companies like IBM looked for fields of profit and deployment of their technologies, triggering the first wave of smart city projects internationally. New developments trigger protests and contestations around privacy concerns and top-down placemaking. Fabian's project looks at the concept of smart and therein smart citizens that are activated to help city systems run smoothly. Digitized processes offered by administrations could lead to a wider digital divide, thus excluding people from partaking in smartified public services and thus enacting these new forms of citizenship and participation.
concepts of citizenship and displacement gain traction when looking at such inequalities and practices of social exclusion within cities and beyond. Looking at how lines are drawn between regular citizenship and indigenousness helps us to understand concepts of place. Johanna Lederer is currently working on her project Reimagining Canada through Indigenous Speculative Fiction and Indigenous Activism within our graduate college. She explores Indigenous literature and social practices of place, wherein colonial renaming practices, once means of social exclusion, become the very medium of reappropriation, redefinition, and rethinking place for First Nation, Inuit, and Métis in Canada. Not only do such practices transform the present and future understanding of place through speculative literature, they also transform common readings of the past.
Finally, Ayse Chawla's interdisciplinary work forms a fertile ground to situate us and think of our very own research projects at the graduate college. Her work proves to be very valuable in understanding place and practices within the globalized urban landscape of today. With this very brief introduction, we are very happy to express our gratitude and an extended warm welcome to Ayse Chawla for being here with us today. And without taking ado, would like to invite you on stage. Thank you, Ayse Chawla.
Oops. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very generous, warm welcome. And actually, this visit, this event, already became very dear to me. That when I see that how my work has been read and how it had reached to other kinds of work and where it moved, so I'm really thankful for your invitation and giving me the floor to share my ideas, and very much looking forward to discuss and hear what my work with you further. And what I hear from the introductions, it is really very promising to have not only a kind of an ambitious project with bringing several disciplines around the practicing place, but also having a very broad mix of scholars from very different parts of the world. Not necessarily coming from a different part of the world is a merit in itself, but people bring some different questions, different kinds of approaching to the similar topics. So this is very valuable. So I feel very much at home already. I don't know that it is, I don't think that it is Heimat, but I feel very much at home. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I haven't prepared a PowerPoint because I wasn't sure where we would be. And then when I heard that we would be indoors, that it was already that I was on the way. So together, what I will present is partly based, of course, it follows the ideas from my former work and our joint work with Nina Glick-Schiller on in the book that you have mentioned, but it takes certain issues further, and I think there are kind of interfaces which might be interesting for your project. So together with the rise of the right-wing popular support, there has been an increasing attention to the deepening of social, economic, and demographic cleavages between the high-growth urban cultures, metropoles, and clusters, metropoles, mid-size, small-size, and cities and rural areas. Places that are referred to as left behind, quote-unquote, and characterized by economic stagnation, decline, depopulation, high unemployment, and entrenched poverty, came to be seen as engines of right-wing support. These places have almost became a trope for discussing the current surge of populism in scholarship and public debates. Interestingly, in the depiction of the rise of right-wing support in these economically troubled cities, though migration has a very strong discursive presence there, there's very little attention paid to migrants themselves and their location in making and remaking of the economic, social, political, and above all, the affective fabric of such cities. As Nina Glick-Schiller and I have been arguing for more than a decade, studying and theorizing the location, if you wish, the placing of migrants in cities of varying scale has been neglected, and relations of migrants and migration dynamics continue to be theorized, predominantly on the basis of research conducted on powerful metropoles and or gateway cities. This neglect is striking for several ways, because of several reasons. First, empirically, there has been an increasing trend of migrant settlement in mostly depopulated, declining towns and in rural areas since at least the 1990s, even it goes earlier. So we are just disregarding that kind of chunk of processes. Furthermore, not only are migrants increasingly settling in these places, many of such depopulated and declining cities actively reach out and welcome migrants, refugees as part of their efforts of repopulation and revitalization. Here I particularly refer to cities that are part of network of city governments and connect welcoming migrants to desired prosperity. Here I'm not talking about welcoming culture on the basis of humanitarian regimes or concerns. This is welcoming migrants and refugees, connecting this welcoming to prosperity of the depopulated, declining, economically stagnating places. There are a number of economically and demographically troubled cities in Europe and US which welcome migrants as part of their efforts to revitalize their cities and economies. Thirdly, this neglect is also striking theoretically for highlighting still the persistent grip of methodological nationalism you were referring to in migration and urban scholarship and policies. Working on the cities is not a remedy or antidote against methodological nationalism. You could be working on cities and you could be reproducing methodological nationalism and well and alive. Despite the scholarship documenting in migration and theorizing the economic and judicial uneven nature of the nation-state territoriality in the current context of globalization, in studying the varying opportunities for migrant emplacement, this unevenness and variation of migrant opportunities of emplacement are still neglected. The location of migrants in cities continue to be theorized as if the nation-state space were legally, economically, and politically even. Although we theorize unevenness on one hand, and when it comes to the migrants, we assume that as if it were an even place throughout the national territory. To counter the discontent of methodological and nationalism, we called for a multiscalar analysis of the location of migrants and city-making processes, which builds upon understanding, and these are the basics of where I come from and how the work is built upon. So it builds upon an understanding that city spaces are constructed within within changing global trajectories of capital accumulation over time. For that reason, it is important to analyze if we want to understand the urban dynamics and lives within these structures and processes of capital formation, because the relations of actors of different degrees and types of power and their subjectivities are shaped and transformed within these trajectories. It is not a deterministic perspective, but trying to situate how the subjectivities are also formed and transformed within these global trajectories. Related, the location of migrants in city-making processes are closely shaped by the nature of the processes of value generation or you could say wealth generation in the city of a given historical conjuncture, which produces opportunities and constraints for migrants' emplacement within the social, cultural, economic, and political fabric of the city. In my talk, what I will do is that I will first focus on why it is important to look through the lens of disempowered cities, that comes to the title, into the dynamics and the paradoxes of a particular form of city making. Then I argue for a need to shift our analytical vocabulary from mobility to displacement in order to highlight the interrelated dynamics of urban development and migrants' emplacement, which otherwise remain veiled if we approach these key processes simply through the lens of mobility. So I will argue that the concept of mobility is not very helpful in understanding these dynamics that I would like to shed light. Finally, I will draw attention to the specific affective landscapes these forms of urban development give rise to in these disempowered cities, which in turn, I think, contribute to populist anti-migrant sentiments. And this maybe you could translate in your project as I understood, it is about like kind of the experiencing the place that I would like to talk about also, that affective dimensions. However, anti-migrant populism is only one aspect of the complex dynamics in these disempowered cities. It is only one part of a more complex story. Then I would come at the end of my talk that there is another part in that story that we should not disregard. I would like to end with an optimistic note. So why, what is the merit of looking through the disempowered, through the lens of disempowered cities? First of all, what does the disempowered cities, what are they? They refer to cities marked by losses, loss of population, tax base, a mix of economic, political, and cultural power in relationship to other localities around the world. They are disempowered in terms of access to capital, investments, human capital, and national power. These are cities, so they are cities with limited resources available for their residents. And I think here it is important to underline that these are not simply powerless cities. They not only used to be powerful, but they also have material traces and memory of this past, facilitating their ability to relate to the days of power gone, in contrast to their current powerlessness. So these are not simply, there are lots of powerless cities, but they are not disempowered cities. Disempowered cities looks at it, a particular dynamic. And furthermore, these cities have, though often decaying, an infrastructure and built environment reminiscent of both the powerful past as well as its aftermath of decline, abandonment, and loss. both the materiality, and I think that both the materiality of past grandeur and loss are inscribed into their cityscapes. This is important in terms of understanding the affective investments as well as the disappointments the processes of urban development lead to in these cities. So it is actually, if you want to look at it, how the experiences of urban development in disempowered cities situate the residents vis-a-vis to their cities. Most deindustrialized cities, so what are those disempowered cities? Most deindustrialized cities fall into this category of disempowered cities, but there are others. There have been centers of which they have been centers of commerce, trade, culture, and religion, which were powerful and became disempowered. But they were not deindustrialized in the strict sense of the term because they were not industrial towns to start with. However, no matter whether the basis of their power were industry or commerce or religion as a religious center, the lost power had been inscribed into the cityscapes as abandoned, neglected, decaying infrastructure, industrial areas, or as cultural architectural heritage. These material inscriptions into the city space contribute to the potency of narratives and imaginaries of successful past, decline, end of current quote-unquote renewal and development in today's anger and resentment present in these kind of cities. Why is it important to concentrate on disempowered cities? So that is, you see that I'm very much interested in disempowered cities, which I have been for a long time, actually. First, the contradictions, fault lines, and the injuries brought about by neoliberal urban regeneration at the backdrop of reduced central government spending on local governments, municipalities, become more visible and acute in the disempowered cities than they are in better resourced and more powerful cities. So looking through the lens of disempowered cities, particularly through those which had also adopted a welcoming narratives for migrants, might prove to be fruitful to provide insights into the contradictions and effects of particular forms of urban development on the social and political lives of these cities. In our research, with Nina Glick-Schiller, we looked comparatively at the urban regeneration processes geared to overcome the economic and social decline in 3 historically and geographically different but disempowered cities, and the location of migrants in these processes, how the migrants were emplaced in these processes. Located in nation states with very different histories, discourses, legacies, and policies of migration, the cities of our focus were, for those of you who have read the book that know about it, but for those of you who haven't, these were Manchester in New Hampshire, US, Halle an der Saale in the former GDR and current Federal Republic Germany, and Mardin, Turkey, on the border of Turkey and Syria. They are very wild kind of comparative cities, if you want. It is a kind of a relational, multi-scalar, comparative perspective. At the turn of the millennium, each of these cities have embarked on a systematic efforts to alter their economic, cultural, local, national, and global connectedness. The goal was to create, renew their infrastructure, and initiate vitality that could attract international corporate and financial investors to overcome their stagnation. They were doing what all the other cities were trying to do, but they are trying to overcome their stagnation. For this, there was a need to alter their negative images that these were disempowered cities, that they had difficulty in terms of attracting international and foreign capital, including human capital. So what were those negative images? Terror and poverty in Mardin, racism and anti-foreign sentiments in Halle, and disreputable abandonment in Manchester, which made the city as dangerous. And actually, all those three cities were seen to be as dangerous for foreign investment and capital, including human capital. All these cities adopted foreigner, migrant, and capital welcoming narratives as part of urban regeneration and wealth accumulation. So there's not only one narrative, migrant welcoming narrative, but it is also capital welcoming narratives. Here I think it is important to note that what I'm talking about in terms of urban dynamics within the frame of neoliberal restructuring of economies, where cities have become key sources of accumulation, especially by adopting entrepreneurial strategies. So it is not about cities since Middle Ages. I'm talking about city making at a particular frame. So the broader context of the strategies and policies I'm referring to here is they are neoliberal city making in its various forms and shades. I am aware that there is no template as a neoliberalism, but what we know is that there is a common denominator, that they are geared towards generating wealth by revitalizing and making the city competitive. This is the context in which cities increasingly unleash themselves as engines of economy, centers of trade, investment and innovation from the federal and national state. And this unleashing is related with the restructuring of capital, which alters the value regimes and governance in cities. When I say which alters the value regimes, I refer to the value of different sites, different places, different segments of population, and different pasts. So it is all actually, it is that's why I say that it is an alteration of reconfiguration of the value regime. So in this context, cities' enterprising capacities, including human capital, have been reconstructed and rediscovered in order to enhance the city's competitive advantages to attract capital and accumulate wealth. Those of you who are familiar with David Harvey's work, Neil Smith, that this follows from that. In order to generate a process of accumulation, urban spaces are restructured with a substantial intervention into the built environment. So built environment has a very important aspect, a location in this kind of city making. That's to make the city more appealing. The developers and the city leaders focus on urban development, starting particularly with the regeneration of the abandoned, dilapidated buildings and city center to revive their economies so that they reposition themselves to overcome their stagnation by attracting capital and human capital. In all these cities, we saw that the typical mechanisms of neoliberal urbanism were set in motion. What were they? That is provision of public subsidies for private development to serve individual or corporate, rather than public interest, using corporate tax incentives, capital subsidies, or provisioning of the commons, public land to corporations for numerous projects of urban renewal. What they did was that the end effect of this is that, like in many places, they resulted in dispossessions, leading to social displacements, growing inequalities and precarity of both migrant and non-migrant inhabitants. Due to the disempowered nature of these cities, this is happening in many places. But because these are disempowered cities, the effects of these processes of urban redevelopment and displacements were felt more drastically than in the well-resourced cities. Now I would like to focus on a little bit on the semantics and the concepts through which we could approach and conceptualize this dynamics of cities and migrant lives and emplacement. I argue that in order to capture the process of migrant emplacement and city making and scrutinize the effects of urban development and its residents, migrant and non-migrant, we need to shift our lens from mobility to displacement. I'm fully aware that there have been calls to shift our analytical vocabulary from migration to mobility in order to be able to address the autonomy of migration and to acknowledge the agency of migrants and counter the sedentary logic of migration, scholarship, and politics. So we have just moved from the migration to the mobility perspective. Then you could say that what is this? That now you want us to drop the mobility and move to another concept. I think it is, though it is important, yes, this is exactly what I want. Though it is important to highlight migrants' agency in their acts of mobility, I think the concept of mobility comes with some limitations. One of the main problems in giving mobility a central stage in the analysis of migration and migrants' practices is that mobility is a concept closely related to the nation state. The nation state often occupies a central role in defining and institutionalizing what counts as mobility and what kinds of mobilities and whose mobility and when are rendered visible and invisible within such regimes. Actually, that is the Noel Salazar and Eglik Schiller had written on that kind of the regimes of mobility and showed that. We know that not every mobile person is designated as a migrant, for example, the expats, and there are many people designated as migrants who had not moved from anywhere to anywhere to, for example, the third or fourth generation so-called migrants. They didn't move anywhere. Or thus the mobility lens is very much embedded within the political regime of nation states, and the selected mobilities it sheds light onto while overshadowing all other mobilities and immobilities of people. So within the nation state, that is, people are not referred as that kind of, although we had in certain places, in certain times also, with rural-urban migration, that we had this had a very important place. But now in the migration research, it is basically actually cross-border mobilities. This is, of course, very different. If you look at it in South Asia on migration studies, what you see is that basically it is internal migration, and if you look at it, that it contributes to our what has been done as migration studies in global north. Now it is very fertile to look at it together. But what I'm saying is that certain mobilities get lost, are not recognized as mobilities, and also certain immobilities. That is, refugees are taught to be as mobile, but most of their lives are defined by immobility. So, and furthermore, these regimes are shaped by the power dynamics of a given historical conjuncture. Who will be considered as mobile and in what terms changes. One of the most important benefits of using the concept of displacement is that it allows us to address series of interrelated processes which are obscured by the concept of mobility. Here I need a caveat. First of all, displacement is not simply another term for mobility. Unfortunately, this is happening, that people who had worked on migration and then moved to mobility, now putting the same work, changing the term with displacement. I use displacement to refer to physical movement as well as downward social mobility, and in both forms it refers to the disruptions of previous relations to people and places. So displacement comes with the disruptions. It is closely connected to the processes of dispossession, in the sense that though displacements are often the outcome of dispossessions, displacement themselves lead to further dispossessions. Shifting from a mobility-centered to a displacement-centered perspective enables us to frame population or individual movements in relation to other processes, namely of dispossessions resulting from the erosion of livelihoods, but also from wars. While the concept of mobility does not necessarily connect the processes underlying migration with each other, the concept of displacement enables us to situate migration and migrant dynamics, practices, in relation to other key processes of capital formation and restructuring, which are crucial in our case for city making. In short, it enables us to address the key processes of, as I refer to, wealth generation through urban development and migrant and non-migrant emplacement in interrelation to each other. So with the mobility, we are focusing on the act of moving, that we are not looking at the relations of the processes that bring that kind of movement. And displacement, actually, it depends, of course, what you would like to look at it. So we could see and analyze in this way how seemingly independent processes, but also locations, as well as institutions of varying scale, are ultimately interconnected with each other. So why I'm not trying to make a splash on a glass of water, because in terms of the conceptual network, because these are conceptual networks of analysis, not only determines what we reveal and what we obscure, but also the semantics of dividing, thinking about difference, connections, and domains of commonalities among city residents. Both migrants and non-migrants are subject to the processes of displacement and dispossession within urban structuring dynamics in cities. This is that displacement and dispossession are not in the monopoly of migrants. So it enables us, this kind of a concept enables us to bring them into a common lens. Such a framework facilitates us to capture not only the interdependencies among these processes and the resulting common conditions of precarity, which come to mark the lives of many urban residents, migrant as well as non-migrant. That is to say, the displaced may include those who have stayed in place and claim to be natives, as well as people of migrant background who have moved and worked to build new lives. By analyzing accumulation by dispossession and the following displacement, scholars can make visible the forces that underline both increased movements of people within states and across state borders, and the growing downward social mobility and anger of those who stay within their city, country, or region, but feel increasingly excluded, in fact, displaced in their own country and city. Thus, adopting a new analytical vocabulary helps us to address and analyze these processes, actors, but also the conflicts of repositioning of a city in relation to the reevaluation processes of urban spaces, as I said, segments of population and institutions shaping migrant emplacement in relation to each other. In this way, we situate migrants and non-migrants within the same networked transformative processes beyond native-stranger divide. So we are not talking about actually for the migrants how they could become participants of that society as integration or whatever that incorporation, what kind of terms you want to use it. There's a one concept to capture the participation, exclusion of all the residents of the city. Their conditions might be different, but the concept is the same. In the context of rising populism, I think any act of moving beyond the binaries of difference generated by national imaginaries that dominate public discourses is particularly important. This is important because binaries such as migrants and quote-unquote natives, one never knows who is the native of what, often establish the building blocks of antagonistic discourses of populist politics that I referred at the beginning. This analytical vocabulary also urges us to adopt an analysis to address the multiple relations and networks of differential power within which cities and migrants' emplacement are constituted. This means focusing on relations and connections between cities, institutions, infrastructure, and actors of varying scale. Such analysis brings together various intersecting local, regional, national, and global, quote-unquote, maybe in your term, placing networks without fixed territorial hierarchies, so that we trace why and how certain policies, forms of governance, sets of institutions and actors, near and far, come together at particular point of time and space with what kind of effects, what kind of consequences. In that sense, here city making refers to the multiscalar relations of power through which different actors acquire value and gain or lose or maintain resources as they become actors and subjects of wealth generation and city governance. In each city, we observed that migrants became part of financial, cultural, commercial, and political networks, and participated in the multiscalar networks that linked the city to funding streams and to other locations. So they contributed to the placing of the cities, as if I were, you correct me if I'm using it wrongly. Migrants, by helping to constitute but also to unfold networks of multiple institutions, became city makers. Actually, they become the actors of situating, then the placing of that city, which is a very dynamic process, as I referred to. In all those three cities, these dynamics entailed two kinds of welcoming narratives, as I said, migrant foreign friendly and capital friendly. Interestingly, while the capital business investment friendly narratives translated themselves into a plethora of programs and incentives to attract capital and investment, migrant welcoming narratives did not translate into any concrete programs and incentives with funding. I'm talking about the disempowered cities. The contrast between those two welcoming narratives and the provision of services and policies were striking. While One of them remained simply at discursive level. The capital-friendly incentives were connected to concrete policies about subsidies, tax rebates, abolishment of business corporate taxes, provision of public resources, commons to corporate capital below market prices. This kind of provision of commons are very important to think about the migrants and non-migrants in terms of their displacement and dispossession, and for political action. And city regeneration in all these cities we studied was shaped by a strong dependence on public funding, which was very weak in these cities to start with. So it is, if you are talking about the public funding available in the cities in Manchester, US, it is very different than New York. Or in Washington, what is available. So in all three, and you are using the public funding for the urban development for corporate interests to attract corporations. Interestingly, despite their similar numbers, migrants, refugees became actors and targets of the plans, mechanisms, and narratives for downtown city center reconstruction, financialization, real estate and property revaluation strategies. So it was not related in terms of the percentages, numbers of migrants or minorities. In that sense, you don't have to deal with only with migrants. So, for example, migrants and refugees were reported in reaching out some of the federal, but also some supranational EU funds or UNESCO funds that proved to be crucial for city center development in several cities. And what happened? What happened with that? Could you tell me, because I forgot my phone, I don't know the time, how much time I have? Okay. So what happened after these? What were the effects of those capital and foreign migrant welcoming narratives? So first of all, these cities were successful in attracting some domestic and international capital. But despite that, their public revenue streams did not increase because of the nature of the adapted form of urban development. On the contrary, the regeneration projects left the three cities with even fewer resources for public services, especially within the context of sharp reduction in central government spending on local government in the name of neoliberal austerity. So they had very little money left, actually. They were getting even less money from the federal government. So attracted federal and supranational funds, which were attracted, were channeled into rebuilding efforts that ultimately filled the coffers of developers, multinational corporations, and public-private partnerships. And public money was extended to the corporate capital with the justification that the projects would then attract further corporate and financial investors who were difficult to attract due to their city's negative reputation. So each city relied on public monies and debt for their regeneration projects. And I think debt plays a very important role in the economies and in the social and political life of these cities. In fact, for Manchester, Halle, and Mardin, the city debt increased drastically after a decade of urban projects of economic growth, in turn affecting local funds available for public services ranging from education to transportation. So they attracted capital, debt increased, and the public local funds available for services decreased. After a decade of this form of urban development and urban growth, all three cities ranked within the top 5 cities with highest debt in their respective countries. And I don't think that this is a coincidence. This form of urban regeneration contributed to private wealth rather than public services very clearly for either migrant and non-migrant residents. When you do not have public funding, actually there it doesn't end. If it is about education and about transportation and the basic services, it really doesn't matter that whether you are a migrant or a native, you don't have that funding. In all three of the cities, so despite renewal and flow of some corporate capital and some city center development, disparities and poverty increased, dispossession and displacement intensified. So these regeneration processes, as I said, were intertwined with incentives to revalue property, sites, local histories, and some sectors of the population. And sometimes migrants, for example, in Mardin, the historic minority population acquired an increased value, especially as part of heritage narratives, within these reevaluation processes, and were situated as actors and subjects of the repositioning of their cities. However, these narratives within which migrants and minorities were upfront in the welcoming of the foreigners and the minorities stood in contrast to the simultaneously drained public monies, increased inequalities, debt, displacement, and dispossession resulting from this form of urban regeneration. And they established a very fertile ground for polarized politics. So it is not because that people had anti-migrant sentiments forever, or that the migrants were not adapting or doing this or that, or civilizational quote-unquote clashes, but this is what was maybe you could say that the conditions of practicing the place were put into that kind of a conflictual dynamics. These dynamics of urban regeneration led to two simultaneous developments, providing both opportunities and challenges to migrant emplacement in all three cities. Migrants and foreigners who were upfront in the welcoming narratives, who didn't get any kind of special funding, were increasingly made the scapegoat of the effects of the dispossessive dynamics of this particular form of urban regeneration, growing inequalities, and particularly of draining public resources, explaining the lack of public services to the city residents. They are handy, actually, to explain what is happening. And that was happening, those narratives and those facts were happening same time. The growing inequalities and the contradictions and fault lines of this form of urban development, namely the erosion of public funds and services, made the migrants and the migrant welcoming narratives advance a fertile ground for the rise of populist anti-migrant politics. In the context of the dispossessive effects of this form of urban regeneration, the entangled welcoming narratives of capital and of migrants and foreigners contributed to popular anger and resentment of these movements, with a racist juxtaposition of quote-unquote natives and migrants. Some of the abundant, dilapidated places reminding the powerful past and its loss were being restored. Don't forget, they got the money, and for this, especially the city center, and put into use, raising the residents' expectations about the improvement of their livelihood and re-empowerment of their city. However, despite the empowerment in improvements in the built environment, glossy renovations, and refurbished storefronts, the urban residents remain further impoverished with fewer public services and increasing inequalities, fueling the feeling of what Hassan Haj identifies as stuckedness. In contrast to a form of imaginary or felt movement, a viable life presupposes, Haj argues that people who have the feeling of existential immobility, that their lives are not moving in line with others or with the changes in their environment, so that they experience a sentiment and feeling of stuckedness. Stuckedness is shaped by a specific form of waiting for something undesirable, such as the erosion of livelihoods and disempowerment, to come to an end. And you have all the signs that it is coming to an end, but actually your expectations, it is not coming to an end. You feel the stuckedness, you have existential immobility. Both in Manchester, Halle and Mardin, the combination of partly improved and renovated built environment, especially the city center, and increased impoverishment inflicted this feeling of stuckedness with one's life. So it is about that, how you experience that space and that place. However, simultaneous to this feeling of existential immobility and scapegoating migrants for the effects of dispossessive dynamics of urban regeneration and empowerment and the increasing feeling of stuckedness, we also saw that in those disempowered cities, that these empowered cities provided opportunities for migrants, refugees to become part of local politics and mobilizations seeking social justice and more inclusive politics. So at one point you have that kind of the anti-migrant, this kind of, that's why I'm saying that it's a polarized politics, that at one point it fuels populist politics and anti-migrant one, but on the other hand, that it establishes a ground, a commonality on the basis of the precarities for, and opens a kind of a local space of politics. Indeed, investigating the location of migrants in city making in cities with limited resources, we saw that they provided new insights into different kinds of opportunities that emerged in these places for migrant emplacement, especially in terms of local politics. The disempoweredness of these cities opened local spaces for politics, for migrants and refugees. There were no municipal resources invested in provisioning of migrant-specific services, let alone religious, ethnic, community-based services. However, this lack of resources and programs for any kind of institutionalization of ethnic, religious, and cultural difference, ironically opened opportunities for migrants, refugees, and the quote-unquote displaced natives, not only build sociabilities based on domains of commonality, primarily construed by their common conditions of precarity, but also they become part of local politics with broader claims of social justice beyond identity politics, without differentiating necessarily migrants and non-migrants. It is noteworthy that not only the cities were that at the top 5 of the cities in their respective countries with the highest debt, but in Germany, one of the very first black members of the German parliament, which actually we have indicated in the book, who in fact arrived in Germany as a refugee from Senegal, was elected from Halle, not from Berlin or Frankfurt. Manchester, not New York, elected the second Muslim citizen to US state legislature, and the very first elected Syriac Christian woman mayor in Turkey was in Mardin, not in Istanbul or in Ankara. Most importantly, none of these political figures were elected on the basis of particularistic, like black, ethnic or religious communitarian politics and constituencies, but on the basis of politics seeking social and historical justice and challenging the increasing disparities in their respective cities. Actually, they were elected beyond identity politics. For conclusion, that I will say that, as I argued, the materiality, I will come back to this materiality of loss and redevelopment. As I said, the materiality of loss and redevelopment inscribed into urban space play an important role. The mismatches between the materiality urban renewal and the social and political effects of urban regeneration mark the complex landscape of affect in these cities. The decaying infrastructure and abundant built environment which characterize the disempowered cities I have referred to are usually framed as tangible remnants of interrupted progress or futures that never came to be. That is, Svetlana Boym argues about that very well, actually. Often the relations to such environments of abandonment and decay are framed in terms of sentiments evoking yearning and nostalgia for the powerful past. Actually, especially with the far right, one talks about those kind of nostalgias too. However, I think in the case of these disempowered cities, it was the feeling of stuckedness rather than nostalgia resulting from the paradoxes of neoliberal urban renewal with the dispossessions and displacements of residents, which provided the ground for this kind of far-right politics. Looking through the lens of disempowered cities might be an entry point to problematize the category of left-behind cities, which became paradigmatic of discussing the rise of far right as the natural seedbed populism. Instead, we could replace it by a more nuanced analysis of differential workings of urban development in cities of differential power and especially their affective landscapes. Constructing solidarity among city residents of diverse social, political, and economic backgrounds and legal status has been a major challenge to those aspiring to and imagining alternative visions of society and urban life. I'm part of it too. While the heterogeneity of the backgrounds, socializations, and interests create tensions and frictions, but they also provide chances to establish domains of commonality beyond tolerance of difference, but on the basis of shared aspirations by city dwellers, migrant and non-migrant alike. However, we were able to actually unearth this kind of quote-unquote unexpected commoning only when we adopted a new vocabulary and a multiscalar global perspective. Disempowered cities proved to be an excellent vantage point to understand dynamic disparities of urban regeneration, urban development, a particular form of urban development that dispossessed people, but also offered restructured opportunities, ironically, increased growing precarity, but also opened different venues of political mobilizations, no matter how unsettling they are. Thank you. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ayse Schala. I'm here to facilitate a little bit the Q&A after our talk, and I think there's a lot to take away for us. And Shruti Malik will pass around the microphone. I keep my mask on, maybe, even though we are probably all tested and or vaccinated. But yes, Martin Sademach, maybe if you can.
Yeah, thank you very much for this really fabulous talk. Congratulations to the study. Actually, I take in essence everything. Thank you so much for putting our focus to displacement. Thank you. I think it was okay also like this. But dispossession, all these disruptions to relations, to connections. There was one minor issue I would like to add. When you want to drop the notion of migrants and mobility, I think in my research, I also do some research with refugees, and I do not talk about migrants anymore, but about displaced persons. And so, related to your title, you might specify because why you use this notion actually. And then also to the notion of mobility. If I got you right, yeah, you really have gone that far that you want to make a point for dropping it down. And I might ask, maybe it might be useful to keep it and to have both concepts complementary. So, with relation to the issue of migration, you gave us very good points, the role of the nation state, for example, the immobilities of the migrants, third and fourth generation, everything is taken. But especially to the concept of capital and finance, we have highly mobile and fluid capital all over the world. Yeah? So I think in this relation, the displacement notion goes probably a little bit too far. Thank you for commenting on this, and again, thank you for having this wonderful opener for us. Thank you.
Should I respond immediately? Thank you very much. Actually, you allow me to elaborate, and you're right in terms of that's why I said that I'm talking only in relation to the city making. But of course, you cannot talk about mobility of or flows of capital, flows of finance, and I mean goods. That the goods are not displaced. The goods are moved from one place to the other. But I'm referring to this kind of the euphoria on the mobility and kind of developing I know that it's the act of mobility for refugees, for migrants, for all of these people. There is an agency involved in it. But we have to, I don't want to have that kind of agency in a kind of a valorization of that agency on that basis. So when I'm saying that displacement, replacing mobility in relation to city making that I'm talking about. But in terms of, I will not talk, for example, displacement of capital. Actually, you can talk about displacement of capital, but that would not be helpful actually, because if you are talking about the dynamics of the capital, there is that kind of displacement always part of it. It is in the logic of it. It has to move. It has to change places, and for that I could live with that. So take what I am referring to as in relation to the quote-unquote migrants, refugees, to looking at through the lens of mobility. Because also for the refugees, if you are working on refugees, you know that they might be moving in very different borders, but also refugees move within the same nation state so many places, and this is not the foundational mobility seem to be always the cross-border mobility from the lens of governance, actually, governing these moves, because it is not really the concern within. We had that kind of the concern and regulations and restrictions of mobility during the COVID. That it came, that it's not only the cross-border within the cities also that we were not able to move. So I take your point, but you're right. but I'm talking about dropping that concept in relation to city making and refugees and then the migrants, and particularly mobility, this touch of euphoria of agency that one person moves. Of course, there is, but we should be very careful because these are forced movements, actually.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's okay, I think, with the mask on. Thank you so much for this really intriguing talk. And I was particularly taken by your understanding of social justice. And I would like to hear more about it, particularly because I was, while you elaborated on the non-identity politics-based form of social justice, first I thought it's going to fall back onto class. Sorry? It's going to fall back onto class, and it seems to me it doesn't. So I would like to hear more a bit about what the role, the function of place or placemaking is in relation to negotiating discrepancies, any kind of discrepancies, in terms of social justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is, I think that the social justice, questions about social justice, and I always use it together with the places, with the historical justice also, that comes, and I think that historical justice, once you look at it through historical justice, that it enables you to avoid those kind of lens of an identity politics. The historical justice might be related with particular groups, with particular histories and then the past, but the way that they have been claimed and opened, not necessarily with the kind of the communitarian dynamics. And that is, I think, is important. In all the places that, I could give you a good example from the Mardin case, that the city. The Syriac Christians, and who were actually the quote-unquote native population of that area, had to leave, actually were subject to genocide, and then and left in different stages, and then they came back to the city as part of the city-making project of that repositioning efforts of the city, and of course for their property. But this is a place that they came back, that as a returnee, as a quote-unquote migrant, a returnee, but as a minority also. And if you look at it, look at that city, that the relations between Syrian Christians and the Armenians were not left anymore, but the genocide was being the Armenian genocide, the Syrian genocide, and but also with the Kurdish population, they were very tense relations. So for a long time, it went through a kind of a very much a communitarian and identity politics, not identitarian. At one point, they joined for historical justice, for claiming. So it was not only one group, but about the reappropriation. You were referring to reappropriation of the place. And this was actually reappropriation of the place through reappropriation of the history as historical justice. Social justice is, I did not go to class. Of course, there are, if you're talking about the solidarity or the commoning. Solidarity is more stronger, but the commoning of different groups, that we are talking about actually people who share precariousness in in those dynamics. But this kind of precariousness is not very easy to capture in only clusters. If you look at all those anti-austerity movements that you have the working class, but also middle classes part of it. And so very different groups, but then looking still at the kind of who were made, who found common grounds on the basis of the precarious condition that they have been subject to because of particular changes taking place in the city. I don't know whether this answers your question. Thank you.
Hello, yeah. I think we would have time for maybe one more question, if there was one or two. So I'm just taking a look. Yeah? No.
Then I'll be happy to. Thank you so much. While I completely buy your rejection or your cautious note on mobility, because I always thought mobility is for those who can decide whether they want to move or not, I would like to ask about another competing term. We talk about displacement, and as someone who's involved with placing, I like to hear it, but I've always worked with the notion of diaspora too, diaspora in a more broader sense. And I would have liked your thoughts. I mean, certainly it's not the same kind of thing, but what made you, or so far in your work, if I'm not mistaken, what made you not so much dwell on diasporic experiences, but those of displacement? And I continue, while you were talking, I continually thought of New York City. I remember years and years and years ago when they were proud to get rid of, like, Times Square was safe, quote unquote safe, but it just happened that those people who lived there were brought just 1 or 2 blocks south. And that continues in the city, making that an entirely different place. And in fact, you could call for a new kind of map making, because these people still live, but not just where they used to live. So all this kind of rejuvenation or regeneration comes at a very high cost, which I think you pointed out. But my question was actually more about the term diaspora, or the concept. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, you're right that I refrain to use diaspora and diasporic experiences. One reason is that diaspora is a kind of an homogenizing concept on the basis on an axis, either or ethnic or religious axis, historically, but also in terms of experience. If you could say diasporic communities, but still I don't know who is this diaspora or not, per definition, a priori. But the diaspora actually defines itself in relation to a particular place, which is ancestral homeland. And in the kinds of the dynamics that I'm talking about, they're not, there is not that kind of a reference to an ancestral homeland. And ancestral homelands are also have a product of particular regimes and particular historical conjunctures. So, and I don't know the merits, I mean, I'm not convinced of the merits of, for example, whether we could talk about diasporic aesthetics or diasporic experiences. I know the experiences of exiles. And I think this Said has the Winter of Mind, a wonderful article talking about what being an exile means, because it is a kind of a particular condition of placing. And that comes with certain state of mind, independent of where you are from or what you have been exposed to. But exile is a little bit different than diasporic. And I could understand the sentiments of being in exile, and I think that I have seen several different streams of that. But diasporic actually really goes back to that you are people from a particular place do share certain ways of experiencing or certain sentiments, and this axis actually gives them a homogeneity. And we know that diasporas are being made and remade. And for a long time, there were lots of Turks living every part of the world, and no one talked about diaspora. The moment that the Turkish state got into it and to try to institutionalize, but not only, that the World Bank was very much involved in the establishment of the diasporas because of the remittances issues and then the connecting and trying to use them for political purposes. So you could look, what I found interesting is that how certain institutions are involved in the formation of or cutting a group of people as diasporas. So that's why I don't use it. Diasporic experience, yes, maybe a particular kind of small, but I'm not sure whether it is enough to create an analytical concept. It is a product.
Thank you, Professor Caglar, for your fascinating talk. I very much like your critique of the concept of mobility, and I'm very convinced by your suggestion to replace it with the concept of dispossession and displacement, which reminds me of the way that Marx used those concepts in his theory of original accumulation. But I'm wondering, could those concepts also help to dehymatize the concept of place that is often used to anchor cultural membership and to anchor dichotomies of foreign and native, for example? Could the concepts of displacement and implacement help to, in this respect, dehymatize such concepts of place?
Yes, in a way, because displacement and emplacement are, these are not static. These are all in continuous process. So you have to, you're not emplaced in one place and that's it. And it is a kind of a constant process which is related to other dynamics. It's not by itself. But Heimat is actually you are placed, and if you are not there, so displacement is in relation to a space. And in the Heimat. But the displacement that I'm using here is, that's why I refer to the rupture of those kinds of networks, and this could happen within the same city, within your own Heimat too. So in that sense, I find it more useful. And it could dehymatize in a way, showing that, and that's why I said that in the left behind places, actually these are the people who are displaced in their own quote unquote country or city. And if you put it that way, actually this helps to dehymatize that, which assumes that everything could be fine or could be improved once you are in that place. There is a place that you belong to. In the displacement, there is not a place that you belong to. It is a continuous process. Maybe that answers your question.
Thank you so much. We are at the end, not of our wits, but at the end of the time. Dinner's ready, but first, let me thank you for coming, for your talk, for taking questions. So this is an applause for Ayse Caglar. Thank you.